Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Thucydides A History of the Peloponnesian Wars. We are now turning into the session. We finished last week, last time we met, not last week, but last time we met, uh, the winter of the third year. And now we're going to be turning into the summer of the fourth year. And we're going to book three. So let's start looking at this thing. Again, we're using the Crawley translation in the edition of Landmark Thucydides, which is available online. We're using the PDF, but the Google Books version. There's, like I said in the previous things, there's issues with the Google Book version because of these things here are really on the side in the real book, and therefore in the book they're useful, and here they're kind of misleading because you think these things would be heading, not coming after. So let's look at book 3, chapter 1. The next summer, just as the corn was getting ripe, the Peloponnesians and their allies invaded Attica under the command of Archidamus, the son of Zeuxidamus, king of Sparta, and ravaged the land. The Athenians' horse, as usual, attacking them wherever it was practical and preventing the mass of the light troops from advancing from their camp and wasting the parts of the near city. After staying the time for which they had taken provisions, the invaders retired and dispersed to their several cities. Um, chapter 2. Immediately after the invasion of the Peloponnese, Lesbos, except Methelina, revolted from the Athenians. The Lesbians, who wished to revolt even before the war, but the Spartans would not receive them. Yet now they did revolt, and they were compelled to do so sooner than they had intended. While they were waiting until the moles of their harbor and the ship and the walls that they were building should be finished, for the arrival of archers and grain from and other things that which they were engaged to bring from Pontus and Tindadians, whom with they were at enmity, I mean hatred and dislike, and the Methilians, and other dissident persons in Metile itself, who were pontiff of Athens, informed the Athenians that the Methilians were forcibly uniting the island under their sovereignty, and that the preparations about which they were so active were concerned with their kindred of the Boeotians and with the Spartans, with a review to a revolt. And unless they were immediately prevented, Athens would lose Lesbos. Third third chapter. However, the Athenians, distressed by the plagues and by the war, had recently broken out and was now raging, though in a serious manner, to add Lesbos with its fleet untouched resources to the list of their enemies, and at first would not believe the charge, giving too much weight to their wish that it might not be true. But when the embassy which had failed to persuade the Metlians to give up the union and the preparations complained of, they became alarmed and resolved to strike the first blow. Accordingly, they suddenly sent all 40 ships, which had been ready made to sail out around the Peloponnesus under the command of Clepides, son of Danaus, and two others. The word having been brought to them of the festival in honor of the Melian Apollo outside the city, which is celebrated by the whole people of Metline, and at which, if haste were made, they might hope to take them by surprise. If this plan succeeded, well and good. If not, they were ordered. They were ordered to the Metlians to deliver up their ships and pull down their walls, and if they not obeyed, declare war. The ships accordingly sent out, and 10 Metelian trimenes present with the fleet according to the terms of the alliance, were detained by the Athenians and their crew placed in custody. However, the Metelians were informed of the expedition by a man who crossed from Athens to Ubia and were and going overland to Gerestu, okay, Gerestus, okay, this is one of these tough words, uh, uh, Gerestus, sailed from hence by a merchant vessel, which he found on the point of putting to sea, and so arrived at Metli the third day after leaving Athens. The Metlians accordingly refrained from going out of the temple at Mela, and moreover barricaded and kept guard round the half-finished part of their walls and harbors. Chapter 4. When the Athenians sailed not long after and saw the thing stood, the generals delivered their orders upon the Metlians, refusing to obey, and commenced hostilities. The Metlians were compelled to go to war without notice and unprepared. At first, sailed out with their fleets and made some show of fighting a little in front of the harbor, but being driven back by the Athenian ships, immediately offered to parley with the commanders, wishing uh, uh, if possible, to get the ships away from the for the present upon any tolerable terms. The Athenian commanders accepted their offer, being themselves fearful that they might not be able to cope with the whole of Lesbos. And the armistice having been concluded, the Methodians set out to Athens. One of the informers, already recipient of his conduct, and the other with him to try to persuade Athens of the innocence of their intentions and to get the fleet recalled. In the meantime, having no great hope of a favorable answer from Athens, they also sent off a trimene with envoys to Sparta, unobserved by the Athenian fleet, which was anchored at Mela, north of the city. Chapter 5. While these envoys, having reached Sparta under a difficult journey across the open sea, were negotiating for assistance to be sent to them, the ambassadors from Sparta returned without having affected anything, and hostilities were at once renewed by the Methodians and the rest of Lesbos, with the exception of the Melahenians, who came to the aid of the Athenians, and the Iberians and the Limeans, and a few other allies. The Mysileans made a sortie with their force against the Athenian camp, and the battle ensued, in which they gained some slight advantage, but retired notwithstanding, not feeling sufficiently confident in themselves to spend the night upon the field. After this, they kept quiet, wishing to wait for chance reinforcements from the Peloponnesus before making a second venture. Being encouraged by the arrival of Meleus, a Laconian, and Hermodonius, a Theban, who had been sent off before the insurrection, but had been unable to reach Lesbos before the Athenian expedition, who had now stole in a trimene after the battle, and advised them to send another trimene and break an envoys back with them, with the Metelians accordingly did. Meanwhile, the Athenians, greatly encouraged by the inaction of the Metelians, summoned allies to their aid, whom came in all the quicker from seeing so little vigor displayed by the Lesbians, and bringing around their ship to a new station in the south of the city. Fortified two camps, one on each side of the city, and instituted a blockade of both harbors. The sea thus was closed to the Metelians, who, however, commanded the whole country, interior lands, and the rest of Lesbians who now joined them, the Athenians only holding a limited area round their camp and using Meta more for the station of their ships than their market. Chapter 7. While the war went on this way at Metlin, the Athenians, about the same time in the summer, also sent 30 ships to the Peloponnese under Espus, son of Formo, and the Arcanians, insisting on the commander that the commander sent should be some sort should be some son or relative of Firmina. As the ships coasted alongshore, they ravaged the seaboard of Laconia. After which Aspistus sent most of the fleet home, and himself went on with 12 vessels to Nupactus. After raising the whole Arcadian population. He made an expedition against Orineda, and the fleet sailing along the Archelaus, while the army laid waste to the country. When the inhabitants, however, showed no sign of submitting, he dismissed the land forces himself and sailed to Lucras, where, making a descent upon Nericus, he was cut off during his retreat, and most of his troops with him, by the people in those parts, aided by some coastal guards. After which the Athenians sailed away, recovering their dead from Leucidians under the truce. Now this is now chapter 8. So therefore, we have two things. We have the lesbian revolt, right? The Messalian, and getting unifying some of the smaller cities on Lesbos to revolt against the Athenians, but one of the cities are not willing to join in. They were informants got to them. They got back. The Athenians went there, sieged them a little bit, had a little battle. They delayed it, got their ship to go to Sparta to get aid, and then someone who got in from Spartan allies got in. Two of them got into there and recommended they go out again, but the allies came and cut them off. Athenian allies cut them off from doing this. Meanwhile, another the Athenians, led by one of the allies, uh, son of one of the leaders, went on an adventure over there, and they, didn't go so. It went well, pretty well at the beginning, but then it kind of had a problem at the end. Now he says, meanwhile, the envoys of the Metellina sent out in the first ship were told by the Spartans to come to Olympia in order that the rest of the allies might hear them and decide upon the matter. So which they journeyed hither. At the Olympiad, in which Rosian Doreus gained the second victory, and the envoys having introduced to make their speech at the festival, they spoke as follows. This is the speech of them. This is the speech of the Messalians to the Athenians. Sparta and the allies. The rule established among the Hellenists is not unknown to us. Those who revolted during a war and forsake their former confederacy are favorably regarded by those who receive them, insofar as they are of use to them, but otherwise are thought less well of through being considered traitors to their former friends. Nor is this an unfair way of judging, where the rebels and the power from whom they succeed were at one in policy and sympathy, and a match for the other in resources and power, and where no reasonable ground exists for the rebellion. But with us and the Athenians, there was not the case. And no one need think the worse of us for revolting from them in danger, after having been honored by them in time of peace. Justice and honesty, this is now next chapter, chapter 10. Justice and honesty, again, this is the continuation of the Metellin speech, will be the first topics of our speech, especially as we're asking for an alliance, because we know that there can never be any solid friendship between individuals or unions between communities that are worthy the name unless the parties be presented and persuaded of each other's honesty and generally congealed to one to the other, since from difference in feelings springs also difference in conduct. The alliance between ourselves and the Athenians began when you withdrew from the war against the Persians, and they remained to finish the business. We did not become allies of the Athenians for the subjugation of the Hellenes, but allies of the Hellenes for their liberation from the Mede. And as long as the Athenians led us fairly, we followed them loyally. But when we saw them relax their hostility to the Mede and try to make the allies their subjects, then our apprehension began. Unable, however, to defend ourselves on account of the number of confederates that had votes, all the allies were enslaved except ourselves and the Claians, who continued to send our contingent as independent and normally free. Given these examples, we could no longer trust the Athenians as a leader. However, it seemed unlikely that she would subject our fellow confederates and not do the same to us who were left. if she ever had the power. And chapter 11. Now, had we all been independent, still independent, we could have had more faith in their not attempting any change. But the greater number being their subject, while they were treating us as equals, they would naturally chafe under this solitary instance of independence as contrasted with the submission of the majority, particularly as they daily grew more powerful and more destitute, and we more destitute. Now the only sure basis of an alliance for each party to be equally afraid of the other. He who would like to encroach is then deterred by the reflection, then he will not have the odds in his favor. Again, we are left independent. It was only because they thought they saw their way to empire more clearly by specious language and the paths of policy than by those of force. Not only were we useful as evidence that powers whom had voted like themselves would not surely join in their expedition against their will, without the party attacked being in wrong. For the same system which who also enabled them to lead the stronger states against the weaker first, and to leave the former to last, stripped of their natural allies and less capable of resistance. But if they had begun with us, while all the states were still had resources under their own control, and there was a center to rally around, the work of subjugation would have been found less easy. Besides this, our navy gave them some apprehension. It was always possible that they might unite with you or some other power and become dangerous to Athens. With respect which we paid to the community and to leaders for the time being, also helped us maintain our independence. However, we did not expect to be able to do such much longer, and if this war had not broken out from the example which we had laid of their conduct to the rest. In other words, they thought the trend was that they're going to lose power. The Athenians were gaining power in the situation. How the smaller allies, so that in other words, they all the Mithlians are saying, listen, they think the Athenians are going to just enslave us eventually. They waited. They didn't do so earlier because we were too powerful, and they wanted to do it against us at first. In other words, there's kind of a logic here of fearing of mistrusting of the power of the Athenians. As the Athenian power grew, and more so than theirs, they, in other words, their argument was we could trust alliances if we're equal. But if we're not unequal, they're more powerful than us, then they're going to impose their will on us. Okay, this is kind of an assumption in that sense. Now, next, chapter 12. How then could we put our trust in such friends or freedom if, as we had here? We accepted each other against our inclination. Fear made them court us in war, and us them in peace. Sympathy, the ordinary basis of confidence, had its place supplied by terror. Fear having more share than friendship, and detaining us in the alliance. And the first party that should be encouraged by the hope of impunity was certain to break faith with the other. So to condemn us for being the first to break off, which they delay the blow that we dread, instead of ourselves delaying to know for certain whether they wish to be dealt with, it will be dealt or not, or is to take a false view of the case. For if we were equally able with them to meet their pilots and imitate and imitate their delay, we should be their equals and should be under no necessity of being their subjects. But the liberty of offense all being always theirs, that of defense clearly is ours. Um, uh, Now, this is now number 13. Such Spartan and allies are the grounds and the reasons for our vote, clear enough to convince our hearers of the fairness of our conduct, and sufficient to alarm ourselves and to make us turn to some means of safety. This we wished to do so long ago when we sent to you on the subject when the peace yet lasted, but were prevented by your refusing to receive us. Now, upon hearing the Boeotians inviting us, we are at once responded to the call and decided upon a twofold revolt from the Hellenes and from the Athenians, not to aid the latter in harming the former, but to join in their liberation, not to allow the Athenians in the end to destroy us, but to act in time against them. Our revolt, however, had taken place prematurely and without preparations, a fact which makes it all of the more incumbent on you to receive us in alliance and send us speedily relief, in order to show that you support your friends and at the same time do harm to your enemies. You have an opportunity such as you never had before. Disease and expenditure has wasted the Athenians. Their ships are either cruising around your coasts or engaged in blocking us. And it is not probable that they have enough to spare if you invade them a second time this summer by sea and land. Either they will offer no resistance to your vessel or withdraw from both our shores. Nor must it be thought that this is the case of putting yourself in danger for a country which is not yours. Lesbos may appear far off, but when help is wanted, she will be found near enough. It is not. It is not in Attica that the war will be decided, as some imagine, but in the countries by which Attica is supported, by the lands and places that uh, the Athenians' revenue is drawn from their allies and will become still larger if they reduce us, as not only will the other cities, no other cities revolt, but our resources will be added to theirs, and we shall be treated worse than those were enslaved before. But if you will frankly support us, you will add to your side a city that has a large navy, which is your great want, and you will smooth the way to overthrow the Athenians by depriving them of their allies, who will be greatly encouraged to come over, and you will free yourself from the accusations made against you of not supporting insurrection. In short, only showing yourselves as liberators, and you may count upon having the advantage in this war. Respect, this is the next 14 now. Respect, therefore, the hopes placed in you by the Hellenes and the Olympian Zeus, in whom temple we stand virtually as supplicants. Become the allies and defenders of the Metelians, and do not sacrifice, who put our lives in jeopardy for the cause and which general good will result to all from our success, and still a more general harm if we fail through your refusing to help us. Be men that the Hellenes think you, and that our and that our fears desire. Such as 15. Such were the words of the Lycians. After hearing them out, the Spartans and their allies granted what they urged, took the Lesbians into alliance, and decided in favor of an invasion of Attica. Told the allies to present to march as quickly as possible into the isthmus, two-thirds of their forces. Arriving there first themselves, they prepared hauling machines to carry their ships across from Corinth to the sea on the side of Athens, and in order to make their attack by sea and land at once. However, the zeal which they displayed was not uh, imitated, imitated by the rest of the allies, who came in but slowly, being both engaged in harvesting their grain and sick of making expeditions. Meanwhile, the Athenians, who were aware of the preparations of the enemy, were due were due to his convictions and their weakness, wished to show him that he was mistaken, and that they were able, without moving their fleet off Lesbos, to repel with ease one with which they were menaced from the Peloponnesians, and therefore manned 100 ships by embarking the citizens of Athens, except the knights and the Pentecostemenians and the resident aliens, and putting out to the isthmus, displayed their power and made descents on the Peloponnese wherever they pleased. So unexpected was this response that it made the Spartans think that the Lesbians had not spoken the truth, and embarrassed by their non appearance of the allies, coupled with news that the 30 ships around the Peloponnese were ravaging lands near Sparta, they went back home. Afterwards, they prepared a fleet to send to Lesbos, and ordering a total of 40 ships from different cities in the league, appointed Alechidas to command the expedition in his capacity as admiral. Meanwhile, the Athenians, in 100 ships, upon seeing the Spartans go home, went home likewise. Now, 17. If at the time that this fleet was at sea, Athens had almost the largest number of first-rate ships in commission than she ever possessed at any one moment, and she had as many as even more than the war began. And at that time, 100 guarded Attica, Boeotia, and Salmis. 100 more were cruising around the Peloponnese, besides those employed at Podia and other places, making the total of 250 vessels employed active service in a single summer. It was this with Podia that almost exhausted her revenues. Podia had been blockaded by a force of hoplites, each drawing 2 drachma a day for himself and the other for his servant, which amounted to 3,000 at first, and was kept at this number down to the end of the siege. Besides 1,600 with Formino, who went away before it was over, and the ships being all paid at the same rate. In this way, her money was wasted at first, and this was the largest number of ships manned by her. 18. About the same time the Spartans were at the isthmus, the Mytileans marched by land with their mercenaries against Mytilea, which they thought to gain by treachery. After assaulting the cities and not meeting with success, they anticipated they withdrew to Anticia, Pereha, and Arestus, and taking measures for better security of these cities and strengthening their walls, hastily returned home. After their departure, the Mytileans marched against Anticissa, but were defeated by a sortie by the Anticicians and their mercenaries, and retreated in haste after losing many of their number. When word of this reached Athens, and the Athenians learned that the Mysileans were masters of the country and that their own soldiers were unable to hold them in check, they sent out at about the beginning of autumn Paches, son of Epicreus, to take command, with 1,000 Athenian hoplites, who worked their own passage, and who, upon arriving at Metlet, built a single wall around it with forts at some of the strongest points. Metellina was thus blocked strictly by both sides, by land and sea, and winter now drew near. And this, although they had for the first time raised the war tax of 200 talents from their own citizens, the Athenians still needed money for the siege, and sent out 12 ships under the command of Lysias and 4 others to collect money from their allies. After cruising to different places and laying them under contribution, ladies went up countries from Melos and Caria across the plain of Meander and to the far the hill of Sanders, and was attacked by the Carians, the peoples, and other sides. Now this was the beginning of the winter time, so 2019 begins the winter, and many of his soldiers are slain. So that this starts the winter. We ended 2019 at the winter, and this ends the summer of the 4th year. Okay, if you have any comments or questions, please do it. I've seen some comments from people earlier and other things, and sometimes I will comment something, and so if there's something I can add, I will respond to it if I can add something. Sometimes you can't, there's nothing to respond to. I will do things. So please put your comments in. Um, if you have any, if you like it, please share, please. Forward this to a friend or put on your social media. Follow, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Subscribe to get more. Recommend to a friend to subscribe, please. We can build the channel some more. Um, um, you can follow me on social media listed below. If you want to help me do this, to subscribe. I'm not going to beg about this. I mean, it's there. It's a means to do something. We'll see. I'm told I should do something else as well, Patreon, but I haven't done it yet, and I probably won't until I figure out how to do things. And therefore, that's it. Have a good day. See you next time.